The streets of Brooklyn were already half asleep when Emily Carter stacked the last chair on top of the table. Outside, the neon sign of Carter's Coffee flickered, humming against the quiet night air. It was nearly midnight, and most of the city had surrendered to the hush of darkness, save for the occasional taxi sliding through the wet pavement. Emily's hands smelled faintly of cinnamon and espresso as she wiped the counter one last time. She was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled in the chest and weighed heavier than any tray of cups. The cafe wasn't just her workplace, it was her lifeline. Ever since her parents' accident 3 years ago, she had carried the burden of raising her younger sister, Sophie, while trying to keep her family's dream alive. Most nights, the little shop barely made enough to cover rent, and yet, here she was, lights still glowing, as if refusing to give up. Emily reached for her keys, whispering softly to herself, "Another day done, Em. Just keep going." She had almost turned the lock when it happened. A knock. Soft, hesitant, out of place in the dead of night. Her body froze. The sound echoed in her ears, colliding with the silence of the empty street outside. She frowned, stepping closer to the glass door. At this hour, no delivery was expected. No customer should be wandering in. Her first thought was to ignore it. But something, a strange intuition she couldn't name, made her pause. Slowly, Emily turned the key back and cracked the door open. And then she saw him. He stood under the glow of the street lamp, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the doorway even before he stepped inside. His suit was perfectly tailored but slightly undone, the top buttons of his black shirt open, revealing a gold chain against his chest. His dark hair was thick, swept back with just enough disorder to look dangerous. But it wasn't his clothes or his stance that made Emily's breath hitch. It was his eyes, piercing blue, sharp, commanding, and yet holding a weariness she had never seen before. The man's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. His voice was low, smooth, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised to be obeyed. "One last coffee?" Emily's pulse spiked. She should have said no. The cafe was closed. She was alone. Everything about him radiated danger. And yet, she found her hand loosening on the door. There was something in his tone, something almost fragile beneath the power, that unsettled her more than the broad shoulders or the glint of gold. "We're closed," she managed, her voice trembling against her will. He tilted his head, studying her as if her refusal was only a formality. "Please," he said softly. "Just one cup. I won't take long." It was madness, she knew. Letting a stranger in at midnight. A stranger who looked like he belonged in the kind of headlines she avoided reading. But his gaze pinned her to the spot, and against her better judgment, Emily stepped aside. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Inside, the cafe suddenly felt smaller. He moved with a kind of restrained power, every step measured, deliberate. Emily tried not to notice how the room seemed to bend around his presence. He glanced around, taking in the mismatched chairs, the chalkboard menu, the tiny potted plant clinging to life in the corner. For a moment, he looked almost human, almost like a man who had wandered in from the cold, not someone who could shatter her world with a word. Emily wiped her palms on her apron. "What will it be?" "Surprise me," he said, lowering himself into a chair near the window. He leaned back, spreading into the space as though he owned it. "Something real. Not perfect, just real." Her throat tightened. She didn't know why those words cut through her walls so quickly. Maybe because that was exactly what her life was. Not perfect, just painfully real. She brewed her midnight blend, the one she usually saved for herself. A dark roast with a hint of cinnamon and honey. The aroma filled the room, calming her shaking hands. She poured it into a chipped mug, the kind she never gave to customers, and set it in front of him. He lifted it, inhaled slowly, then took a sip. His shoulders eased as though the warmth seeped into his bones. "Good," he murmured, closing his eyes briefly. "Better than anything I've had in years." Emily blinked. You've probably had coffee from the best baristas in the city. You're telling me mine is better? He opened his eyes, locking onto hers. A dangerous smile tugged at his lips. I'm telling you, yours is real. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not awkward. Just charged. Emily's instincts screamed that she should keep her distance. That whoever this man was, he wasn't safe. But then he spoke again, his voice low, almost confessional. You probably think it's strange. A man like me showing up at your door at midnight. Her heart thudded. Strange, yes, she whispered, leaning against the counter. But maybe everyone needs something. Some people need coffee. Some just don't want to be alone. His gaze sharpened, as though her words cut deeper than she realized. For the first time, she saw it, the loneliness hidden in the steel of his expression. You see right through me, he said. That's what happens in cafes, she replied softly. People pour their stories into cups as much as they pour sugar. He didn't answer. Not at first. He simply stared into the dark liquid in his cup, his jaw tight, as though fighting words he didn't usually speak aloud. And then, as if the weight of silence forced it out of him, he murmured, My name is Logan. Emily swallowed. The name flickered in her memory. She had heard it before, in whispers, in headlines, in rumors spoken too quietly to be safe. Logan Moretti, the Moretti crime family. Her blood chilled. She should throw him out. She should lock the door and never open it again. But instead her heart betrayed her, skipping a beat as his blue eyes lifted to hers. That night, Emily Carter had no way of knowing that letting him in for one last coffee would change her life forever. Because Logan Moretti wasn't just another late-night customer. He was the most dangerous man in New York. And somehow, against all reason, she felt like she had just met her fate. The next morning, Emily woke with the taste of coffee and questions still lingering on her tongue. She had replayed the scene 100 times, the midnight knock, the way Logan had looked at her like she wasn't just a barista wiping down counters, but something more. She should have been terrified. She should have slammed the door in his face. Instead, she had let him in. And worse, she had wanted him to stay. By sunrise, the streets outside her Brooklyn apartment buzzed with life again. Taxis honked, vendors shouted, and yet all Emily could hear in her mind was his voice. One last coffee. At the cafe that afternoon, customers filtered in and out, oblivious to the storm brewing in Emily's chest. Sophie noticed, of course. Her little sister always noticed. You're distracted, Sophie said as she tied her apron, raising one brow. Did something happen last night? Emily froze mid-motion, nearly dropping a stack of cups. What? No. Nothing. Sophie narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. Uh-huh. You only clean the counter that many times when you're nervous. Spill it. Emily forced a laugh, hoping her sister wouldn't press further. It was just a late customer, that's all. She didn't say his name. She couldn't. Not yet. But by evening, Emily didn't need to say anything. The news did it for her. A headline blared from the muted TV mounted on the cafe wall. Logan Moretti cited after months underground. Emily's stomach dropped. She stared at the image on screen, his face, sharp and magnetic, standing outside a black car with tinted windows. His name carried weight, laced with both fascination and fear. Customers whispered, "That's the Moretti boss. Runs half the city's underground. Dangerous man. Untouchable." Emily's blood ran cold. The man who had sat at her table last night. The man who had smiled at her chipped mug of coffee. The man whose blue eyes had looked not powerful but painfully human, was the head of the Moretti crime family. That night, when the bell above the cafe door chimed again, Emily's heart nearly stopped. There he was, Logan Moretti, the mafia boss. He didn't bring bodyguards. He didn't bark orders. He simply stepped inside, the faint chill of the night following him, and sat at the same table by the window as if it already belonged to him. Emily stood frozen behind the counter. She should tell him to leave. She should run. But her body betrayed her again, moving on instinct as she reached for the coffee beans. "You came back," she whispered, sliding a cup across the counter minutes later. Logan's lips curved into that same shadowed smile. Did you think I wouldn't? Emily folded her arms, trying to mask the tremor in her chest. I read the papers today. I know who you are. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Logan leaned forward, his gaze steady. And who am I, Emily? Her throat tightened at the sound of her name on his lips. You're dangerous. The kind of man people cross the street to avoid. The kind of man who doesn't belong in a coffee shop at midnight. He finished for her, his voice low. Her heart pounded. He wasn't denying it. Logan's fingers tapped against the mug, slow and deliberate. Then, to her shock, he spoke, not like the untouchable boss the city feared, but like a man admitting a secret. I've had 1,000 dinners at the finest restaurants, sat at tables worth more than this entire shop, but not one of them felt like last night. Not one of them felt real. Emily's breath caught. You're right, he continued, his eyes locked on hers. I am dangerous. My world is built on power, on loyalty, on blood. But here, sitting across from you, drinking coffee in a chipped cup, I almost forgot. She didn't know if it was confession or warning. Maybe both. The bell above the door jingled again, snapping the moment. 2 men in leather jackets walked in, their eyes darting from Logan to Emily. They froze for a fraction of a second, clearly recognizing him. Logan's demeanor shifted instantly. The softness vanished. His jaw tightened, his gaze hardening into steel. The men muttered something under their breath, turned, and left without ordering. Emily's pulse raced. The cafe felt smaller, suffocating with invisible danger. Who were they? She asked, her voice trembling. Trouble, Logan said calmly, finishing his coffee. He stood, towering over her once again. But not your trouble. He leaned closer, his words brushing her skin like a promise and a threat all at once. Lock the door after I leave, Emily. And remember, sometimes danger knocks softly. With that, he walked into the night, leaving her trembling in the glow of the cafe lights. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Because no matter how much sense told her to fear him, her heart whispered the truth she didn't want to admit. She wanted him to knock again. The following days passed in a blur of restless nights and long hours at the cafe. Emily tried to tell herself that Logan's midnight visits were just a strange coincidence, an anomaly in the otherwise quiet rhythm of her life. But deep down, she knew better. Men like him didn't show up at coffee shops by chance, and they certainly didn't come back night after night, unless they wanted something. And Logan Moretti always got what he wanted. By the third night, the regulars had started to notice. Old Mr. Henderson, who had been drinking black coffee at the same corner table for 15 years, leaned over to Emily as she poured his refill. That man, he muttered, his voice low. The one with the eyes like ice. You know who he is? Emily forced a smile, avoiding his gaze. Just another customer, Mr. Henderson. But the old man shook his head, his weathered hand gripping the cup tighter. No, not just another customer. That's Moretti. I've seen his picture in the papers. You be careful, girl. Men like him don't bring peace where they go. The words clung to her all day, haunting her even as she tried to push them away. By evening, a group of college kids came in, laughing and loud. One of them pointed toward the window table, Logan's table. Yo, isn't that where the Mafia guy's been hanging out? My cousin swears she saw him here 2 nights ago. Emily's stomach twisted. The rumors were already spreading. And in a neighborhood like Brooklyn, rumors had a way of growing teeth. That night, Emily returned home later than usual. Sophie was waiting up, curled on the couch with a blanket and a book. Her little sister looked up, concern written all over her young face. You've been different, Sophie said softly. Like you're here, but not really. Emily hesitated. It's just the cafe. I'm tired, that's all. Sophie closed the book, her expression sharpening in a way that reminded Emily she wasn't a little girl anymore. No, it's more than that. There's someone. Emily froze. Sophie's voice dropped to a whisper. I saw him. Last night. The man in the suit. The one everyone whispers about. Emily's throat went dry. You shouldn't have been at the cafe that late. I forgot my homework in the back, Sophie admitted. And when I came in, he was there, sitting like he owned the place. Emily, do you know who he is? Emily tried to form the words but couldn't. The silence was answer enough. Sophie's eyes widened, fear flashing in them. He's dangerous. I heard kids at school talking about him. Mafia, Emily. That's not a rumor. If he's showing up at our cafe, that means we're in the middle of it now. Emily reached for her sister's hand, her heart aching at the tremble in Sophie's voice. Listen to me. He hasn't hurt us. He's different when he's here. I don't know why, but... Sophie pulled her hand back. You're defending him. Emily had no answer, because Sophie was right. Somewhere between fear and fascination, Emily had started to defend Logan Moretti. To herself, to others, maybe even to her heart. The next midnight, the knock came again. Emily stood by the door, her hand trembling over the key. Every instinct told her to let it go, to leave the lights off and walk away. But her chest ached with a strange anticipation, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. She opened the door. Logan stood there, as though he'd known she would. Evening, he said, his voice carrying both authority and something softer. One last coffee? Emily stepped aside. As he settled into his usual spot, Emily noticed something different. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with faint scars. His knuckles looked raw, bruised. Her breath caught. What happened to you? He glanced at his hand, then shrugged. Business. She wanted to press him, to demand answers, but the weight in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she made his usual midnight blend, sliding it across the counter. Business looks painful, she murmured. Logan took a sip, his gaze never leaving hers. Pain is just part of the job. Emily swallowed hard. And what job is that exactly? For a moment his jaw tightened. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. You already know. Her pulse hammered. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't pretending. He was the mafia boss everyone feared, and yet here he was, sitting in her little cafe, drinking coffee like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Half an hour later, the bell above the door chimed. Emily turned, expecting another late customer. Instead, two men in leather jackets entered. She recognized one from the night before. His eyes flicked to Logan, then to her. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Boss, one of them said, his tone half respectful, half nervous. This isn't the place for you. You're exposed here. Logan's gaze hardened. Leave. The men hesitated, then retreated, casting a look at Emily on their way out, one that made her blood run cold. When the door shut, Emily gripped the counter, her hands trembling. Exposed? She whispered. Logan's eyes softened when he looked at her. You don't need to worry about them. Don't I? She shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. They looked at me like I was part of this. Logan stood, his presence towering over her. He reached across the counter, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. The touch was unexpected, gentle. Nothing like the man the world feared. You're not part of this, he said firmly. Not unless you choose to be. Emily's breath caught, her heart betraying her. Because in that moment, staring into his piercing blue eyes, she realized something terrifying. A part of her wanted to choose him. That night, when Logan finally left, Emily sat in the empty cafe long after the lights had dimmed. She stared at the chair where he always sat, her heart pounding with confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't deny. The dangerous truth wasn't that Logan Moretti was a mafia boss. The dangerous truth was that she was already falling for him. The next few days blurred into one another, but for Emily Carter, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Her cafe had always been predictable, a little island of routine in a chaotic city. The hiss of the espresso machine, the bell above the door, the smell of roasted beans clinging to her hair. These things had been constants in her life since she was old enough to help her parents wipe down tables. But now, every night carried a pulse of expectation. She found herself watching the clock, her chest tightening as midnight drew closer. It was foolish, dangerous even, But no matter how many times she told herself to stop hoping, her heart refused to listen. And like fate, or perhaps like a curse, the knock always came, soft, steady, unrelenting. The first time Logan Moretti had entered her cafe, Emily had been too stunned to process it. The second time, she had been too afraid. But by the fourth night, fear had given way to something far more unsettling: anticipation. She would catch herself cleaning a little more carefully, lighting one extra candle on the counter, even adjusting her apron twice before the door ever opened. She hated herself for it, hated the way her nerves betrayed her. But when he stepped inside, the world seemed to shift around him. Logan wasn't just another customer. He was a force, a shadow draped in power and silence. And yet in the amber glow of her cafe, with his sleeves rolled up and his gaze fixed on the steam curling from his cup, he didn't look like the terrifying boss of whispered rumors. He looked human. That night, Emily had been passing the time by sketching on the back of an old receipt. It was something she hadn't done in years, not since her parents died and her dream of becoming an artist was shelved under bills and responsibility. Her pencil moved almost without thought, tracing the line of his jaw, the slope of his brow, the weight in his eyes. She hadn't realized how intently she'd been studying him until she looked down and saw the likeness staring back at her. Mortified, she tried to crumple the paper, but Logan's hand shot out faster than she expected. His fingers brushed hers as he took the sketch from her grasp. For a long moment, he just stared at it. His thumb traced the smudged lines of pencil, his expression unreadable. "You see me differently," he said at last, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Emily flushed. "It's nothing, just a doodle." "No," he countered softly, lifting his gaze to hers. "It's the first time someone has looked at me and seen more than the title." Her chest tightened at the way he said it. The title. Everyone knew what that meant. The mafia boss, the man whose name was both a shield and a weapon. But here he was, sitting across from her, sounding less like a king of crime and more like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to simply be seen. Later, as the city outside sank deeper into the quiet of night, Logan leaned back in his chair, his fingers absently circling the rim of his mug. His eyes had gone distant, as though the walls of the cafe had loosened something inside him. "You know what people think of me," he began. "They think I wanted this, that I was born for it. My father raised me to believe that power was the only way to survive. I didn't inherit an empire. I inherited chains. Golden ones, maybe, but chains all the same." Emily stood frozen behind the counter, her heart pounding. It wasn't just his words, but the rawness in them. He was confessing something no one else in the city would ever hear. "I've lost friends," he continued, his voice rough. "Brothers. People who thought they could trust me. People I thought I could trust. Power doesn't make you safe, Emily. It makes you alone." For a moment, the weight of his admission pressed down on her chest. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she too knew what it meant to carry burdens she never asked for. But the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she set another cup of coffee in front of him, sliding it across the table with a trembling hand. "Then drink," she said softly. "At least here, you don't have to be alone." When Logan finally rose to leave, it was nearly 1 in the morning. The streets outside were silent, washed in the glow of a single flickering lamppost. Emily walked him to the door, her nerves still humming from his confession. That's when she saw it. A man standing across the street, leaning against the post. His cigarette glowed like a warning flare in the dark. He wasn't moving, wasn't passing through. He was watching. Logan noticed immediately. His entire demeanor shifted. The softness she'd glimpsed vanished, replaced by sharp edges and lethal calm. His hand brushed near the inside of his jacket, and Emily didn't need to see the weapon to know it was there. The man flicked his cigarette to the ground, ground it beneath his boot, and melted into the shadows without a word. Emily's stomach twisted. Who was that? Logan's jaw tightened. Someone who shouldn't be here. The certainty in his tone made her shiver. "Am I—" Her voice broke. She swallowed and tried again. "Am I in danger?" His eyes softened then, the steel giving way to something almost tender. He stepped closer, his presence swallowing the space between them. "Not from me," he said firmly. "Not ever." The next night, Emily told herself she wouldn't open the door. She told herself she would ignore the knock. But when it came, soft, steady, inevitable, her hand moved to the key before her brain could stop her. He stepped in, the air shifting as always. But something was different tonight. His suit jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, faint scars catching the light. He looked less like a king, more like a man who had walked through fire. She placed his cup before him, their fingers brushing as she set it down. It should have been nothing, a fleeting accident. But her skin burned where it touched his, and when she glanced up, his eyes were already locked on hers. Neither of them moved at first. Then, slowly, deliberately, Logan turned his hand, letting his thumb graze over her knuckles. The world outside ceased to exist. The cafe fell silent but for the hiss of the coffee machine and the pounding of her heart. Her breath caught, her body betraying her longing. He didn't speak, and he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said what neither of them dared, that whatever fragile thread tied them together had already become impossible to break. That night after he left, Emily sat in the dark cafe, her hands pressed against her chest as if to hold her racing heart in place. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a thunderous, undeniable fact. She wasn't just letting him in for coffee. She was letting him in, piece by piece, into her life, into her heart. And the most fragile things she feared were always the ones the world tried hardest to destroy. Rain tapped against the windows of Carter's coffee like impatient fingers. The city outside was drenched in silver light, reflections shimmering in puddles that stretched along the empty Brooklyn streets. Inside, the cafe glowed with the warm amber of its hanging lamps, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between breaths. Emily Carter was exhausted, but her exhaustion carried a restless energy tonight. She had stacked the chairs, wiped the counters, and polished the glass display twice. Yet her hands still twitched, her heart still raced, not from caffeine, but from anticipation. Because she knew the knock would come. Midnight arrived, and with it, the sound she had begun to dread and crave in equal measure. 3 soft taps against the glass door. Emily froze, her hand tightening on the keys. She should leave the door locked, should extinguish the lights and pretend she wasn't there. But her body moved before her mind could argue. The key turned. The door opened. And there he was. Logan Moretti stood in the doorway, rain glistening on his dark hair, his shirt clinging slightly to the breadth of his chest. The streetlight behind him cast a halo of shadow and silver, making him look less like a man and more like a myth stepping out of the storm. "Evening," he said, his voice lower than usual, roughened by the weather. "One last coffee?" Emily's lips parted, but no sound came out. She simply stepped aside, letting him in. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, shaking droplets of rain from his hair. He moved with that same quiet authority, his presence filling every inch of the room. Yet when he glanced at her, his eyes softened, like the storm outside had no claim here. Emily busied herself behind the counter, though her hands trembled as she reached for the beans. "You'll catch a cold if you keep walking in storms," she said, her voice a shade sharper than she intended. Logan leaned against the counter, watching her with a half-smile. "I've survived worse." She glanced at him, noticing the faint bruise still darkening his knuckles, the tension in his shoulders that never seemed to fade. "Business?" she asked quietly. His smile faltered. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of the coffee machine. Finally, he spoke. "Yes," he admitted. "But for a few hours here, I don't want to be the man who runs that business. I just want to be Logan." Her chest tightened. She poured the midnight blend into his usual chipped mug and set it before him, their fingers brushing once again. This time, neither pulled away. "You scare me," Emily whispered, the words escaping before she could catch them. His eyes locked onto hers, sharp and piercing. "Good. You should be scared. I'm not a man who belongs in your world." "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. His answer was immediate, raw. "Because I can't stay away." The storm outside roared, thunder rattling the windows, but inside the cafe, time seemed to hold its breath. Logan's hand moved first. Slowly, deliberately, he reached across the counter, his fingers brushing against her wrist. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver racing up her arm. Emily tried to step back, but her body betrayed her, leaning closer instead. Her pulse hammered in her ears, her breath shallow. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered. His thumb traced over her skin, sending sparks through her veins. "No," he said softly. "I know exactly what I'm doing. The question is, do you?" Her eyes flicked to his mouth, then back to his eyes. The pull between them was magnetic, undeniable. She wanted to say no, to end this before it began, but the truth burst free in a trembling exhale. "Yes." Logan moved around the counter in 2 long strides, closing the space that had kept them apart for too long. He stopped just inches away, his hand lifting to cradle her face. Rain still clung to his hair, dripping onto her cheek like the sky itself had conspired to bring him here. "Emily," he murmured, her name breaking on his lips like a vow. And then he kissed her. The kiss was nothing like she expected. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was desperate. Like a man starved for something he had never believed he could taste. His lips pressed against hers with intensity, but his hand cupped her cheek gently, anchoring her in the storm of him. Emily melted into it, her body trembling, her fingers curling into his shirt. The world outside raged, thunder cracking, rain slamming against the glass, but none of it touched her. For the first time in years she felt alive, terrified and alive. When they finally pulled apart, both gasping, Logan rested his forehead against hers. His eyes, normally sharp as steel, were raw now, vulnerable in a way she hadn't thought possible. "This is wrong," she whispered, her lips still tingling. "Maybe," he said, "but it feels more real than anything I've had in my life." Before Emily could answer, the faint sound of tires on wet pavement drew her attention. Through the rain-streaked window, headlights crawled past slowly, too slowly. Logan's body tensed instantly. His arm slid around her waist, pulling her slightly behind him, as his eyes tracked the car's every move. The vehicle lingered for a moment, then disappeared into the night. Emily's chest tightened. "What was that?" "Nothing you need to worry about," Logan said, though his voice carried an edge that betrayed him. He looked back at her, his hand still resting on her waist, his jaw set. "But it's a reminder. My world doesn't stay outside these doors forever." Her breath hitched, torn between fear and longing. And yet, when he pressed a softer kiss to her forehead before leaving, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter the danger, she wanted him to knock again. That night, long after he vanished into the rain, Emily stood alone in the cafe, touching her lips as though the memory might vanish if she didn't hold on to it. She had crossed a line, one she could never step back from. And though she knew it might cost her everything, her heart whispered the truth she could no longer deny. She had fallen for the mafia boss. The rain had cleared by morning, but Emily's mind was still drenched in the memory of his kiss. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it again. The press of Logan's lips against hers, the storm raging outside as if the universe itself bore witness. It had been reckless, impossible, forbidden, and yet it had been the truest thing she had ever felt. But with truth came danger, because the moment her lips touched his, Emily Carter stopped being invisible. She was no longer just a barista in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn. She had become something else, a weakness for Logan Moretti. And in his world, weaknesses were targets. By mid-afternoon, the cafe buzzed with whispers. Customers came in, but their eyes lingered too long, their conversations cutting short when Emily passed by. A group of office workers sat near the window, their voices lowered. "I swear I saw him," one whispered. "Tall, blue eyes, dark suit. That was Logan Moretti." "No way he'd step into a hole in the wall like this," another muttered. "I'm telling you, it was him. My cousin works in Midtown. Says the Morettis own half the city's clubs. If he's here, it's for a reason. Emily's stomach twisted. She forced a smile as she delivered their drinks, but her hands trembled as she set down the cups. They were right about one thing. If Logan Moretti was here, it was never without reason. That evening, Sophie arrived to help close up. She was humming softly, tying her apron. But the moment she noticed Emily's distracted gaze, her humming stopped. "He came back, didn't he?" Sophie asked bluntly. Emily froze. "Who?" "You know who." Sophie shot back, her eyes sharp. "The man from the other night. The one everyone whispers about at school." "Emily, you're playing with fire." Emily turned away, wiping the counter with unnecessary force. "He's not what people think." Sophie's laugh was hollow. "He's exactly what people think. You just don't want to see it." Emily's shoulders sagged. "He saved me," she whispered, surprising herself with the confession. "He's dangerous, yes. But when I'm with him, he doesn't feel like a monster. He feels like—" She stopped, her throat tight. "Like what?" Sophie pressed. Emily met her sister's gaze, her voice breaking. "Like someone who finally sees me." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Sophie shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Being seen won't protect you when his enemies come knocking." The words cut deeper than Emily wanted to admit. That night, the knock came as it always did. Emily hesitated longer this time, her hand hovering over the key. Every instinct screamed that she should let the night pass without him. But the memory of his lips, the way his voice had broken when he said he couldn't stay away, pulled her forward. She opened the door. Logan stepped in, his suit immaculate, though his eyes carried the weight of exhaustion. "Evening," he said softly. "One last coffee?" Emily tried to smile, but it faltered. "Logan, people are talking. They know you've been here." "I don't care," he said simply, sliding into his usual seat. "Well, I do," she snapped, the sharpness surprising even her. "This cafe is my life. If people stop coming because they're afraid of you, then I'll make sure they keep coming." He interrupted, his voice steady. "I'll protect what's yours, Emily." Her chest tightened at the conviction in his tone, but before she could answer, movement flickered at the corner of her eye. Across the street, just beyond the glow of the lamppost, a figure stood half hidden in shadow. Watching. Emily's breath caught. "Logan." He turned, his eyes narrowing instantly. His body shifted, every muscle taut. For the first time, Emily saw the predator beneath the polished exterior. The man across the street didn't move. He simply stared for a moment longer, then disappeared into the alley. Emily's hands shook. "Who are they?" "Enemies," Logan said flatly. His gaze softened as it returned to her. "But they won't touch you, not while I breathe." The next morning, Emily found a stranger sitting at the cafe counter before she even opened. He was broad-shouldered, his jaw sharp, a leather jacket stretched across his frame. "Can I help you?" Emily asked cautiously. The man smirked. "Name's Victor. Logan sent me." Her pulse spiked. "Sent you for what?" "To keep an eye on things," Victor said casually, sipping a coffee she hadn't poured. "You've got shadows circling this place. He doesn't want you or the kid's sister getting caught in the crossfire." Emily's stomach dropped. It was one thing to feel the tension when Logan was near. It was another to know his men were now stationed in her world, watching her every move. She should have felt safer. Instead, she felt trapped. That night when Logan arrived, Emily confronted him. "I don't need guards in my cafe," she hissed as she poured his coffee. "You need protection," Logan countered calmly. "No," she shot back, slamming the mug onto the counter harder than intended. "What I need is my life back, my normal. Every time you walk through that door, I lose another piece of it." His jaw tightened, his blue eyes darkening. "Do you want me to stop coming?" The words lodged in her throat. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, because the truth was unbearable. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." Logan stood, his presence towering over her, his voice raw. "Then I'll keep coming, until you do." Later, as she locked up, Emily's hands still trembled. She told herself she should be terrified, that she should ban him from her life before it was too late. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the shadows outside or the guards in her cafe. She saw Logan's hand brushing hers, the desperation in his kiss, the promise in his voice, and she realized the truth she had been avoiding. The danger wasn't just outside her door, it was in her heart, because she was already his. The morning began like any other. Sunlight streaming weakly through the cafe windows, the hiss of the espresso machine, Sophie humming softly as she stacked pastries in the display case. For a fleeting moment, Emily almost believed life had returned to normal. Almost. But normal had slipped away the night Logan Moretti knocked on her door. Victor, Logan's man, still occupied the same stool by the counter, pretending to be just another customer but never letting his sharp eyes wander far from the door. Emily tried to ignore him, but his presence reminded her of the truth. Her life was no longer hers alone. Shadows lingered around every corner, invisible but real. Sophie noticed too. "Doesn't it bother you?" she whispered to Emily as she poured 2 lattes. "That guy sitting there all day, acting like he owns the place? He's not here for us," Emily murmured, trying to convince both of them. "He's here because of Logan." Sophie set down the tray with a huff. "Exactly. And if Logan brings this much trouble just by existing, maybe we shouldn't." Emily cut her off with a glare. "Don't." Her voice cracked with a mix of fear and defiance. "Don't say what I know you're thinking." But Sophie's silence said it all anyway. It happened in the span of a heartbeat. Emily had gone into the back to grab more napkins. When she returned, the counter was empty. Sophie's apron still hung on the hook by the door. Her phone sat abandoned near the register, but Sophie was gone. Emily's pulse spiked. "Sophie?" she called, her voice echoing too loudly in the suddenly suffocating cafe. She rushed to the door, her gaze darting across the street. Nothing but the blur of traffic and strangers' faces. Victor cursed under his breath, already pulling out his phone. They took her. Emily's world tilted. "What do you mean? They? Who?" Victor's jaw clenched. DeLuca's men. They've been circling for days. They finally made a move. The name hit Emily like ice. She'd heard Logan mention it once in a hushed tone. Marcus DeLuca, a rival boss, ruthless and ambitious. If Sophie was in his hands, her knees buckled. "No, no, no, no." Victor caught her by the arm, steadying her. "Call Logan. Now." Logan arrived in less than 20 minutes. Emily had never seen him like this. Gone was the quiet man who drank coffee in chipped mugs and let her sketch his profile. In his place stood the true boss of the Moretti family. His jaw was granite, his movements sharp and lethal, his blue eyes burning with a fury that made even Victor flinch. "Where?" Logan demanded. Victor gave a tight nod. "Warehouse by the docks. DeLuca's men were spotted heading that way." Emily clutched at Logan's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Please, you have to bring her back. She's all I have." Logan turned to her then, his expression softening just enough for her to see the man beneath the steel. He lifted her trembling hands into his, pressing them firmly. "I swear to you, Emily," he said, his voice raw with conviction, "I'll bring Sophie back, even if I have to tear this city apart." And then he was gone, a storm in human form, leaving Emily standing in the wreckage of her fear. The docks were deserted, the fog rolling thick off the water. Logan's black car pulled up silently, headlights slicing through the haze. His men moved with lethal precision, weapons ready, eyes scanning the shadows. Inside the warehouse, Sophie sat tied to a chair, her wide eyes darting toward every sound. Marcus DeLuca circled her like a vulture, his voice a hiss. "Your sister made a mistake, girl. She let my enemy into her life, and now you're going to pay for it." The sound of boots echoed through the warehouse before Sophie could respond. The door burst open, and Logan Moretti walked in. The room shifted instantly. DeLuca's men raised their weapons, but Logan's presence froze them in place. He was every inch the Mafia boss now, radiating power and menace. "Let her go," Logan said, his voice like thunder rolling over the water. DeLuca smirked. "Ah, Moretti. Finally the king leaves his castle. Do you care this much for a barista's little sister?" Or is she just another pawn in your game? Logan stepped forward, his hand brushing his jacket. She's not a pawn. She's family. And then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked, echoing off steel beams. Logan's men stormed the room, moving with deadly precision. Victor tackled one guard, disarming him in seconds. Another man fell as Logan's bullet struck true, his aim cold and merciless. Through the chaos, Logan never took his eyes off Sophie. He moved like a predator, each step bringing him closer until he stood between her and DeLuca. DeLuca sneered, pressing a blade to Sophie's throat. One more step, and she bleeds. For a moment the world held its breath. Then Logan's voice dropped, calm and deadly. Touch her, and you'll never see daylight again. DeLuca hesitated, sweat beating at his temple. The steel in Logan's eyes broke him. With a snarl, he shoved Sophie aside and bolted toward the back door. Logan let him run. Tonight wasn't about vengeance. It was about protection. Logan ripped the ropes from Sophie's wrists, his hands unexpectedly gentle as he pulled her close. You're safe now, he murmured. Sophie clung to him, tears streaking her face. You really came. I promised your sister, Logan said, his voice rough. And I don't break promises. When Logan returned Sophie to the cafe hours later, Emily nearly collapsed at the sight of her sister. She rushed forward, wrapping Sophie in her arms, sobbing into her hair. She's safe, Logan said quietly. She's shaken, but she'll be all right. Emily lifted her tear-streaked face toward him. Her lips trembled, her voice breaking. You risked everything. For her. For me. Logan stepped closer, his blue eyes softer now, stripped of their deadly fire. Emily, there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Her breath caught at the raw honesty in his words. In that moment, she understood. Logan Moretti wasn't just a man of shadows. He was a man who had chosen her light, even if it meant stepping into danger. And against every fear, every warning, Emily's heart whispered the truth she could no longer deny. She loved him. The cafe had never felt the same after Sophie's abduction. Even when the chairs were full, even when the air smelled of cinnamon and espresso, Emily could feel the shadows pressing in. Customers still came, but their laughter sounded thinner, their smiles edged with curiosity or fear. She could hear the whispers whenever her back was turned. That's the girl. She's connected to Moretti now. I heard her sister was taken because of him. Emily wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, that she hadn't chosen this, that her cafe wasn't supposed to be a battlefield, but deep down, she knew the truth. She had chosen. Every time she opened the door at midnight, every time she let Logan's voice soften her defenses, she had chosen him. And choices always had consequences. Victor still sat at his usual spot by the counter, a silent reminder that danger was never far. Sophie stayed home more often, afraid of walking through the neighborhood alone. Even the regulars hesitated to linger, as though every sip of coffee might put them on someone's list. Emily tried to hold the place together. She smiled, she brewed, she pretended. But when night fell, she found herself staring at the door, waiting for the knock. When it came, she opened without hesitation. Logan stepped inside, the storm in his eyes burning hotter than ever. He didn't bother with small talk. He didn't even sit right away. He simply looked at her, searching her face as if to see whether she still blamed him for Sophie's ordeal. You shouldn't be here, Emily whispered. His jaw tightened. And yet, here I am. That night, Logan finally gave a name to the shadow looming over them. Marcus DeLuca, he said, his voice flat, his hand wrapped around his untouched mug. He's the one who took Sophie. He's been circling my family for years, waiting for a weakness. And now, his eyes darkened. He thinks he's found one. Emily's throat tightened. Me! Logan's gaze snapped to hers, sharp as a blade. No, not you. Me. He knows I care about you, and that makes you his weapon. That's why he won't stop. Not until he believes he's broken me. Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. And what happens to us in the middle of your war, Logan? What happens to Sophie, to this cafe, to everything I've tried to hold together? His silence was heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, stripped of all the armor he wore. "I never wanted this life," he confessed, "but I was born into it. My father built an empire, and when he died, I inherited a throne built on blood. I told myself I could rule it differently, smarter, cleaner. But power doesn't care about intentions. It only feeds on more power." Emily swallowed hard, watching him. The man before her wasn't the monster the city painted in headlines. He was a man suffocating under the weight of a crown he never wanted. A man clinging to her café like it was the only place he could still breathe. "You could walk away," she whispered, though even she didn't believe it. His laugh was humorless. "There's no walking away, Emily. Not for me. The only choice I have is how much of myself I lose before it all burns." Her chest ached at the pain in his words. She wanted to reach for him, to offer him a world without shadows, but she knew it was a fantasy. And yet, when he looked at her again, the fire in his eyes wasn't the fire of war. It was the fire of a man who had already chosen. The following night, the cafe's door slammed open before midnight, startling Emily. It wasn't Logan. Two men walked in, broad-shouldered and smirking. They didn't order. They didn't sit. They simply leaned against the counter, their presence dripping menace. "Pretty little place you've got here," one of them drawled. "Would be a shame if something happened to it." Emily's stomach lurched. "We're closed," the second man smirked. "Closed to customers, not to us." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper that made her skin crawl. "DeLuca sends his regards." Before Emily could respond, the bell above the door chimed again. Logan. The air shifted instantly. His presence filled the room like thunder. His blue eyes blazed as he stepped between Emily and the men, his voice a razor's edge. "You've made your point," he growled. "Now get out before I decide you don't leave at all." The men exchanged nervous glances, bravado faltering. They slinked out, but not before tossing a final warning over their shoulders. "This isn't over, Moretti. She's marked now." The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily gripped the counter, her chest heaving. "Do you see?" she cried, her voice breaking. "This is what happens when you're here. They'll never stop, Logan. As long as you keep coming, they'll keep coming too." Logan's expression softened as he stepped closer. "Then let them come," he said fiercely. "I'll burn the city to ash before I let them touch you again." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You can't fight the whole world for me." His hand lifted, brushing a tear from her cheek, his touch both tender and desperate. "I don't need to fight the world, Emily. I just need to fight long enough to prove to you that I'm worth the risk." Her breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. She hated herself for it, but her heart betrayed her once more, because even as the shadows gathered at her door, she realized she didn't want him to stop knocking. That night, as Logan left and the cafe sank into silence, Emily understood the truth she had been running from. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was their story. And Marcus DeLuca had just declared himself a part of it. The night was unusually quiet. No rain, no storm, no distant hum of traffic. The city outside felt like it was holding its breath. Inside Carter's Coffee, Emily wiped down the counters for the third time that evening. The cafe had always been her sanctuary, the one place where she felt in control. But lately, even here, the air carried a tension she couldn't shake. She glanced toward the window, half expecting to see the familiar silhouette of Logan arriving for his midnight ritual. She both longed for him and dreaded his knock. Because each time he appeared, he carried both comfort and danger. Tonight, however, midnight passed in silence. No knock, no voice at the door, only the sound of her own breathing. It started with the faintest scent of smoke. At first, Emily thought it was the coffee grinder overheating. But then the smell thickened, acrid and heavy, stinging her throat. She turned toward the back, her heart lurching when she saw the orange flicker crawling along the storage room wall. "Fire!" she gasped, rushing forward. Within seconds, the flames surged, greedy and relentless. The wooden shelves crackled, smoke billowing toward the ceiling. Emily grabbed the nearest bucket, filling it with water, but as she hurled it onto the fire, the blaze only roared louder, spreading faster than she could fight it. "No, no, no!" she cried, coughing as smoke burned her lungs. She stumbled back, panic rising like a tidal wave. The cafe, the dream her parents had built, the place she had fought to keep alive after their deaths, was being devoured before her eyes. Emily darted toward the door, but a beam collapsed near the entrance, flames licking across the floor. Heat pressed against her skin, suffocating, unforgiving. Her thoughts blurred in the chaos, but one pierced through the haze. Sophie. She couldn't leave her sister alone in the world. She couldn't die here, not like this. She tried again, shielding her face with her arm as she pushed through the smoke. Her vision blurred, her chest heaved, and for a terrifying moment, she thought this was the end. Then she heard it. "Emily!" A voice, deep and fierce, cutting through the roar of the fire. Logan burst through the door like a storm, his jacket cast aside, his face hard with determination. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He charged into the inferno, the fire reflecting in his piercing blue eyes. "Logan!" Emily sobbed, stumbling toward him. He caught her before she collapsed, his arms wrapping around her as if nothing else in the world mattered. Smoke swirled around them, choking the air, but his voice was steady in her ear. "I've got you. I'm not letting go." He pulled her against his chest, shielding her from falling embers, guiding her step by step through the burning wreckage. Every move was precise, controlled, as if he'd carried people through fire before. But Emily knew this wasn't just instinct, this was desperation. He would tear down the flames themselves if it meant saving her. At last, they stumbled out into the night air. Emily collapsed against him, gasping for breath, her body trembling from both fear and relief. Behind them, the cafe roared as flames devoured the walls, sparks lighting up the sky like cruel fireworks. Emily broke then. She buried her face in Logan's chest, sobs racking her body as she clutched at him. "It's gone," she cried. "Everything I fought for, everything I had left, it's all gone." Logan cupped her face, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No. The cafe was never just walls and tables. The cafe was you, Emily. It was the love you poured into every cup, the laughter you gave your customers, the hope you carried even when you thought you couldn't anymore. That can't burn. That can't die." His words wrapped around her like a lifeline, but the pain still clawed at her chest. "It was all I had?" "No," Logan whispered fiercely. "You have me. And I swear to you, I will rebuild whatever you've lost. Brick by brick if I have to. Because with you, Emily, I finally have a reason to live." Her sobs softened into trembling breaths, his voice anchoring her to the ground beneath her feet. She looked into his eyes then, truly looked, and saw not the mafia boss the world feared, but a man who had chosen her above his empire, above everything. As firefighters rushed to contain the blaze, Logan kept her wrapped in his arms, his body a fortress against the chaos. "This was DeLuca," he said darkly, his jaw tight. "He wanted to break you, to break me through you." Emily shivered, her grief tangled with fear. "If he'll burn my cafe, what else will he do?" "Whatever it takes," Logan said grimly. "That's who he is. But hear me now, Emily. I won't let him win. I won't let him take one more thing from you, from us." She searched his face, her voice trembling. "And what if fighting him costs you everything?" Logan leaned closer, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then let it, because nothing I have means anything if I lose you." That night, as the flames died to smoldering ash, Emily clung to him in the glow of destruction. Her heart was shattered, her dream reduced to ruins, but in Logan's arms she found something she never thought she'd have again. Hope. And though the world around them was burning, she knew one truth with terrifying certainty. She wasn't facing the fire alone. The cafe stood in ruins for weeks, nothing but charred beams and blackened walls. Every time Emily walked past the wreckage, her chest tightened as if someone had reached inside and twisted her heart. It wasn't just a building. It was her parents' dream, her refuge, the last piece of her old life. But amid the ashes, something else had taken root. Hope. Because Logan hadn't let her face the fire alone, the community surprised her first. Customers who had once come for their morning lattes showed up with hammers and paintbrushes. Neighbors brought chairs, tables, even curtains. Sophie sketched murals to replace the ones lost, her laughter slowly returning as she painted alongside volunteers. And then there was Logan. He didn't just fund the rebuild. He was there, sleeves rolled up, carrying wood, sweeping debris, even pouring concrete with his men. Seeing the mafia boss, her mafia boss, covered in sweat and dust, working like any ordinary man, broke something open inside Emily. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, she found him tightening a loose screw on the doorframe. She leaned against the wall, arms folded. "You know," she teased softly, "for a mafia boss, you make a decent handyman." Logan glanced up, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Don't tell my men. They'll think I've gone soft." Her heart ached at the sight, because for her, he had gone soft, and that softness was more powerful than anything else he carried. But DeLuca hadn't disappeared. Rumors of his ambition spread through the city like wildfire. He had underestimated Logan once, but after the fire, he doubled his attacks. Businesses loyal to Moretti were vandalized, trucks hijacked, men killed in alleys under cover of night. Logan fought back with the full weight of his empire, but war was costly. Emily saw it in his eyes each night: exhaustion, anger, the weight of every choice pressing him further into the shadows. One night he returned to the rebuilt cafe, bruised and bloodied, collapsing into a chair. Emily rushed to him, panic rising in her chest. "Logan!" she cried, grabbing a cloth to press against the cut above his brow. "You can't keep doing this. You'll get yourself killed." His hand caught hers, steady even as blood stained his shirt. "If it means keeping you safe, then I'll bleed as many times as it takes." Tears blurred her vision. "I don't want your blood. I want you, alive, with me." Logan's jaw tightened. He pulled her closer, his voice breaking. "Then I have to end this, once and for all." It happened 2 weeks later in a dimly lit warehouse, the same docks where Sophie had been taken. DeLuca had arranged a final meeting, his arrogance convincing him that Logan would finally yield. Emily begged Logan not to go. "You've already given enough. Don't risk your life for revenge." Logan cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "This isn't revenge, Emily. It's survival. If I don't end this, he'll never stop coming for you. For Sophie. For us." And with that, he kissed her, a kiss fierce and final, as if it might be their last, before walking into the night. The battle was brutal, but Logan emerged victorious. DeLuca's reign ended in blood and silence, his men scattering into the shadows. For the first time in years, the city whispered not of war, but of peace. When the cafe reopened months later, it was brighter than ever. Sunlight streamed through new windows, the scent of fresh paint mixing with coffee beans. Murals adorned the walls, Sophie's art blooming like color after a storm. Customers returned, not out of curiosity, but out of love for the place that had survived fire and fear. Emily stood behind the counter, her apron tied neatly, her hands steady as she poured cappuccinos. She looked up to see Logan at his usual table, though this time there was no storm in his eyes, only peace. That night, long after the last customer had gone, Emily closed the cafe just as she had done countless times before. She turned the key in the lock, her heart full, when she heard it. 3 soft knocks. She turned, smiling already. "You don't have to knock anymore, Logan." But when she opened the door, he wasn't holding a cup or asking for coffee. He was holding a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling though his gaze was steady. "All my life, I thought power was what made me strong. But you showed me that real strength is letting yourself be seen, letting yourself love. You saved me from becoming nothing more than the shadows people feared." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that shimmered in the light. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or empire, just real, just them. "I don't want a throne. I don't want an empire. I just want one last coffee with you for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Emily's eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Yes. Always yes." Logan slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands uncharacteristically unsteady. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd finally found the only thing worth keeping. From that night on, Carter's Coffee was more than a cafe. It was a sanctuary. A place where people came not just for caffeine, but for warmth, for hope, for stories painted on Sophie's murals and whispered over mugs. And at its heart stood Emily and Logan, not barista and mafia boss, not light and shadow, but two souls who had chosen each other despite the world's warnings. Every midnight Logan still knocked, more out of tradition than need, and Emily still smiled as she opened the door. Because that ritual had given them everything: danger, passion, heartbreak, and at last, forever. And so the story ended as it began. She closed the coffee shop until the mafia boss arrived and said, "One last coffee." Only this time she knew it wasn't just one more cup. It was the beginning of always.